magazine and Pipeliner CRM. And today we're going to talk about the outlook for sales in 2020. Of course, we're already nearly one quarter into 2020, and I hope it started fantastically for all of you. But even if it has or it hasn't, we're going to learn some great things today that can hopefully help you have an even better 2020. We're also live streaming on YouTube right now as well. So if you have any friends or colleagues who didn't register, just send them over to the Sales Pop channel on YouTube and they can see this streaming live right now. Okay, so what's changing? What's staying the same? What is morphing into something new? These are burning questions I'm sure many of you have as the sales profession continues to go through major and dramatic evolution. So I'm joined by some experts today who are going to help us. And I'm going to let them introduce themselves because they'll do a far better job of it than I will. So first of all, Alan Langer. And where are you today, Alan?
John, I'm in Providence, Rhode Island right now.
Fantastic. Okay. And I tell everybody a little bit about yourself before we get started.
So been in sales approaching 30 years, 27 years to be exact, and published a book last year. And I've basically taken, I've started helping people quite a bit with sales training, with helping sales reps and companies figure out how to increase their bottom line, but also get rid of the feeling that most sales reps have of being that salesperson and actually being a human being when they sell. So that's what I've been doing, and it's been pretty successful.
Excellent. And I'm also joined by Mark Bandy. How you doing, Mark? And Mark is coming to us all the way from the UK today. How you doing, Mark?
I'm doing very well. Greetings from an upstairs old bedroom in my mother-in-law's house. So all of these boxes are to be gone through shortly, but I'm in a quiet upstairs room that has great internet connection, and so I'm really glad to be here.
So Mark, you have already gotten banished to the spare room upstairs at your mother-in-law's. That's not a good start to any vacation, is it?
Yeah, that's exactly right. Well, you don't come to England in March for the weather, so I'm here for family, and I'm really excited to be here.
All right, so we also have Kath Malloy, who hopefully is joining us. She is another part of the world having some technical difficulties, so hopefully Kath will be able to join us. But anyway, we have enough sales expertise and brain power on this panel discussion, so we're going to get straight into it. We're going to talk for about 30 to 35 minutes and then do some Q&A. All right, so let's see, in 2020, maybe Alan, starting with you, what are some of the characteristics that you think a successful salesperson needs and why?
So I have this in my book, and it's really the main thing that they focus on. I think every salesperson now, every sales rep now, they have to get rid of, and this is going to sound counterintuitive, but the number one thing you need to focus on when you're actually meeting with a prospect or potential client is actually not to sell them. Your number one focus is to help them. If you get rid of the sales mentality, like I have to make this sale, I have to get this product sold so I can hit my numbers, you'll spend your life being a mediocre salesperson. If you change that philosophy to, all right, I'm here to help you in any way I can, that normally culminates in a sale or in some business with that person. So I always try to train the reps that I talk to, forget about selling and concentrate on helping, and then the sales will actually come.
Mm-hmm. And what about you, Mark? What do you think are some of the characteristics of the 2020 successful salesperson?
I couldn't agree with Alan more. My book, which is out next week, is all about understanding customer value. And in my experience as a Miller Heiman sales consultant over 9 years and talking with 100 other consultants, salespeople are really not very good at understanding customer outcomes. They're good at understanding their features and maybe some benefits. But as John said, you're there to help your customer and understand your customer's outcome, translate your stuff, your offer, your features into customer outcomes. And customer outcomes has to do with customer value. And that's 90% of what moves a customer decision And based on over 100,000 opportunity reviews by over 100 different consultants, that's what salespeople are the worst at. So
You're right.
salespeople are bad at the one thing that's most important, and that is kind of, as John said, be there to be of service and to do some good. And I term it a little bit different, is understand customer outcomes and customer value.
Yeah, I agree with both of you, and I think one of the issues is that, and I think this is becoming more prevalent, is that we're becoming very much removed from the customer because of technology in many ways. A lot of stuff is being done virtually, etc. So we're going backwards even rather than forwards in doing what both of you are just discussing here about how you engage and uncover value and talk about outcomes. So here's another question for you. How much do you think technology is disrupting or augmenting selling in 2020? Because it seems that every day we're getting bombarded with new sales tools, right? So everybody's, oh, shiny new toy, look over here. And at the same time, a lot of selling is being done virtually like this, and it's almost becoming less human and more detached and distracted. I mean, maybe Mark, if you want to take that one first.
You're absolutely right. I just wrote a blog post about the shiny object syndrome. There are over 400 new sales tech options. If you are a vice president of sales right now, there's 400 people who want to sell you sales technology, over 100 people who want to sell you sales training. There's dozens of people who want to help you integrate all that stuff and turn it into implement it. And there's a half a dozen people who they don't want to help you integrate it. They just want to help you choose the right one. And it's kind of, it's really confusing. It's really frustrating. And we know, we've heard on infinitum that the internet has made buyers self-inform more. And all this technology, all these solutions haven't helped us get back to the basics of understanding customer value. That failing that has, from hundreds of thousands hasn't improved just because we have all these tools. We've been more efficient at grinding through a bad process, but we haven't learned what turns a bad process into a good process.
Yeah, absolutely. And Alan, what do you think?
Well, I think there's a couple of components here. One, first of all, prospects never want to meet with a salesperson, even if they need the product or the service. They don't want to meet with a salesperson. So that's what makes the technology, the internet, attractive, because they can actually say, well, I don't have to actually talk to a human being. I can go design my car first, and then I can go to the car dealership loaded with information to protect me from the salesperson. Mm-hmm. So that drives the customer to the technology based. But what I've been seeing over the years, especially recently, is the salesperson who's mediocre or just relatively successful actually is afraid to talk to the customer as well. So they hide behind the technology. They're just going to send out emails and I'm going to hit my numbers. I got to contact 100 people this week. I'm going to do that. And then every now and then I'll get a sale. And the salespeople, the reps that rise to the top, use the technology in a very smart way to get in front of the customer, to get in front of them, get on the phone, get in a Zoom call if it's not in the same state. But if you're a local, you got to get out and meet with customers. The technology is great to use to your advantage, but if you're going to get really good and successful and really help the customer, you have to see them face to face. You have to get out there and see them. So there's a reason why the technology has become what it is, and I think it's the syndrome of being afraid to actually talk to somebody. But the people that are going to be successful are going to use that and then get in front of someone because of it.
Yeah, and I also, sorry, go on, Mark.
No, somebody that I respect a great deal has a favorite saying, and that is, a fool with a tool is still a fool. Mm-hmm. If your solution helps you grind through a bad process more rapidly, your 10% close rate, if you're able to double the number of people you grind through at a horrible close rate, your sales will go up. but there really is a better way, and there's more efficiency. And Alan, you're exactly right that getting knee to knee with the customer and building credibility and getting out in front of their needs, understanding their business, being that exceptional salesperson that understands their world, and being in the unique position of being able to provide perspective where you are the expertise, the domain expert in your solution, whatever you sell, and how it affects customer businesses. That's something that customers can't do and can't get off the internet,
Right.
and is exceptional salesmanship and is exceptionally rare.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I think that I think you're both correct, and also, Alan, getting back to your point about salespeople hiding behind the technology, I think everybody, and I wrote this actually in a blog the other day, I think you have to ask yourself the question, right? Everybody has a webcam today, okay? So if you are doing a virtual meeting, you should switch on your camera and put a face to the name to your prospect. Even if they don't reciprocate, it doesn't matter. You should do it. You don't even have to keep it on the whole time, but you should do it. Now, the question you need to ask yourself is, if you have not gotten up, showered, gotten properly dressed, tidied up your workspace to put your best foot forward, and that's the reason why you're not switching on your webcam, is because you think, oh, well, I'm not sure. How serious are you about your job? Seriously, at the end of the day. So I think you've got to, yeah, you got to try and get in front of people, but you can still use the technology to create a more personal connection, as we have done ourselves when we have talked over virtual technology.
Absolutely.
And
Look at the contrast between my background and Alan's.
Just a moment. Hello.
I'm renting this space right now. But John, you're 100% right. And I think
Sorry, I couldn't quite hear you. Could you?
Sorry, Siri decided to come on. I'm just going to switch off my phone because Siri suddenly, I don't know why, but she seems to like every time you speak, Alan. She likes what you say.
The thing I was going to say is what people the other problem with mediocre salespeople is they're being allowed to be mediocre by the companies that they work for. I go into so many companies and I say, okay, what is your, I hate the term closing percentage, but that's what we use in the sales world.
Sure.
What is your minimum closing percentage? And I actually was in a company this morning. Their minimum closing percentage before they actually even intervene with a sales rep is 26%. To me, that's mind-boggling. That means that if you saw 100 people that week, 74 of them said no. I mean, I don't think that's a successful sales rate. But if the company is allowing a 30% sales rate to be okay, they're allowing their reps to hide behind the technology and do things that is not going to make them exceptional, like Mark said.
Yeah, and let's talk about that, because I think that's an interesting thing to elaborate on. And that is the sales management or the company management component of this, because you're absolutely right, is we take cues from our leaders. Okay. So if you're a salesperson and your sales manager is okay, never checks in on how you present, never looks at, what you're looking like in front of the customer, anything like that, then you're not going to care that much, if, as you say, if they're happy with that close rate. So Mark, maybe from you, what do you think are some of the things that sales leaders, sales managers need to do better in 2020 to help their salespeople be the best they can be?
Well, it all goes back to that same thing, that the one thing that salespeople are bad at is the most important thing, and that is value, understanding customer value and customer outcomes. So you can actually coach to value, and it's easier than coaching to so many other things. If you ask, what is the customer's outcomes? What are they looking for? And you can't, as a salesperson, give your sales manager a great, clean story about what the customer's expected outcomes are for this opportunity, there is something wrong. And if they answer that well and articulate a great customer value story, you know that they've done everything leading up to that correctly. And if they can't answer that question, there's lots of salespeople know that if that's expected, that I've got to be able to answer what's the value, they'll figure out how they can answer that question better for the next opportunity with their manager in a coaching session. So coach to that end. What is the customer's outcome? What do they value? That's probably, if I were to boil down one thing that they could do better, I think that would be it.
Yeah, but what about you, Alan, then? What do you think sales managers could be doing to really accelerate their sales teams in 2020?
Well, I think there's two things, and this is piggybacking off of what Mark just said in coaching toward the customer value. What I see a lot of sales managers do is they manage towards the numbers. You got to hit your numbers. You got to hit your numbers. There was a meme I saw on LinkedIn once that drove me crazy. It was Leo DiCaprio from that movie, The Revenant. And it was a picture of him carrying his buddy out of the woods with this mean look on his face, and he's like trying to get out of the woods from the fire, whatever it was. And the bottom of the meme said, your sales manager carrying you toward your numbers at the end of the month, something like that. And all that was focused on is your numbers. That's it. You're not focused on helping or the value of the customer. You're just focused on the numbers. So what Mark said, definitely coach toward, helping the customer and not worrying about those numbers. But the second thing is, and this is something I got from Jeff Bezos, that he does, or at least I read that he does, but I've implemented it in some of my sales training, is it's called the empty chair. And when I've had sales managers do this, it really is effective. You basically, in your sales meetings, you put an empty chair in the front of the room and you tell everyone in there that that's our ideal customer. That's Joe Smith. He's 45 years old. He owns a house. He has 3 kids. He makes $100,000 a year and he needs X. Now your sales meeting, guess how much your sales meeting changes? Because now you're no longer talking about the customer in an adversarial or in a conquering way. You're talking about the customer as if he's sitting there. And it really changes the mindset of everyone in the room. And I encourage every sales manager that I speak to do that a few times a year, because it really refocuses the reps in the room on that customer without just talking about them like, oh, we closed 31% this month. We got them all. It's not an adversarial relationship. It's symbiotic.
Yeah, it's an interesting point you make there, because let's face it, Abby, you're selling to people, sometimes groups of people. You're selling to, with the customers that you're successful with, you're selling to needs and all of this, and you've met those needs. And yet we tend to still talk about customers in the abstract. It's almost like we forget that 10 minutes ago we were talking to real people. And now we talk about the customer in the abstract, right? And I think you're 100% correct that we've got to get away from this abstraction. And the other part is, we're very fussy consumers or buyers ourselves, but then when we switch sides of the table, we forget what it's like to be a buyer. And I think, and you're right. And just one other thing on the sales manager piece, I think you're 100% correct, is the natural instinct of sales managers, because most of them were top salespeople, is to become super closers, right? Is to say, okay, I'm going to parachute in at the end. And as you say, going to carry you over the line, rather than taking a step back and coaching earlier on. Mark, do you have anything to add to that?
Boy, I absolutely love that empty chair. And I've kind of, maybe I made this up. I made up my own pet peeve for the month. And that was thinking about the idea of closing a sale. Because as sales organization, our close is the open for the customer. That's when they start being accountable. That is the end of their beginning. And for us to have the audacity to think after the sale instead of between sales, is you're already down the wrong path. You're already forming a really unproductive mindset, because that is when all the people that you've been talking to for an entire B2B sales process have been working up the courage to become accountable for a decision that they made to go with you. And you're brushing your hands and saying that, well, we're closed, and now I'm going to hand it off to somebody else. You've hobbled your organization just by using the language of the close.
Brilliant. I love that. Yeah, you're 100% right, Mark.
Yeah, I agree too. I think we have to be careful, because words have meaning, and words do put you in some, you perceive things based on words. And I think you're absolutely 100% correct. I think that's a good thing everybody should look at is what words are we using? How are we describing things? And what's the impact of describing them that way? So here's another thing, right? So we talked about technology. We talked about things that people should be doing and all of this. One of the things that I think people often overlook is fundamentals, right? Because we just believe, because we've been doing something a long time, that we do all of the basics really well, right? We've been doing, it's funny, I do martial arts, right? And I've done it for many, many years. And it doesn't matter what rank you are or how long you've been doing it. We will often spend classes just practicing the basic kicks, ones we've done thousands and thousands of times before for many years. And yet the master will still be tweaking and correcting or saying, oh yeah, you've got into a bad habit of this. And I think it's the same with sales, that sometimes people have been doing it for a long time and they assume that they're doing all the basics well just because they've been doing it for a long time, and they don't revisit it. So what are some of the fundamentals or basics of selling that you think that would be a good idea for people to revisit in 2020? Maybe Alan, go ahead.
Scrap everything you ever learned. No, I'm just kidding. You're right. I mean, what I like to talk about is if you realize you're doing something that works and you're not feeling like a salesperson, that's what you should be focusing on, because you always should reevaluate, or not reevaluate, you always should evaluate the meeting that you had with that person when you're done. Don't just drive away and say, oh, that went well, and then go get lunch and not think about it. I always used to pull over after every single sales call, whether it was a sale or not, and jot down what I thought went well and what I thought didn't went well. And then you start to see a pattern like, oh, when I mentioned this consistently, this is very helpful. That's kind of how I came up with the 7 secrets in my book, is the things that I always knew that I did, which I didn't do all the time. You're a human being, you're going to forget stuff. But if you actually spend the time, it takes a couple minutes, pull over, write down what you thought worked or what didn't work, or why you think you lost the sale, or the customer felt uncomfortable with you, or why you got objections. I get a lot of questions like, how do you handle objections? Well, you shouldn't worry about how to handle them. You should worry about why you're getting them in the first place. They're getting objections for a reason. So if you evaluate that stuff when you leave an appointment, I think that's tremendously helpful.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. I think everybody should take note of that, because I think we're often so glad that something is over, and that we forget to do a little bit of reflection and analysis. And you're right. I mean, if you do that on a consistent basis, you're going to see patterns emerging, which is always a good thing. Good patterns and not so good patterns, both are equally valuable. Mark, from your point of view, what are some of the fundamentals that people should revisit?
Well, I've said it a couple times that it's about understanding customer outcomes, but there's a couple things about that you need to do as a sales fundamental. And one of them is planning, understanding all of the possible personal outcomes, as well as the business outcomes. So thing one is understanding all the outcomes. 2 is making sure you know both business outcomes that the person you're talking to is looking for, as well as what personal outcomes they might be looking for. And understanding those and being able to do those and to explore all those outcomes requires some pre-call planning, because in the heat of a sales call, it's really easy to go in with a plan in your head and forget stuff, because your brain does that. That is a normal response to being in a sales call. It's the adrenal response. You get a little bit excited and it shuts down some of the higher order reasoning centers in your brain. If you have written it down and some of the things you want to talk about and made a plan and work your plan, you won't walk out of that meeting saying, forgot to ask about this. So pre-call planning around value, both business and personal.
Yeah, and just let me focus in on that for a moment. I think a great way of for people who are listening or watching this to figure out are you doing planning properly is to take a look at your calendar And if all you have on your calendar are actual sales meetings or prospect meetings, but you have no planning time set aside, then you have to ask yourself, are you really doing it? Because I 100% agree. If you don't plan for your call, things could go any way. And I think the other part about it is, and a big mistake that people make is they plan, if they do plan, they plan for one outcome only. Not for, okay, here's the ideal outcome. If that doesn't happen, here's the next best outcome I'm going to look for. Planning for the best case, the second best case, but just doing all of that in advance so you're not doing it on the fly. Alan, when you work with people, how often do you see them really setting aside planning time?
Oh, hardly ever. It's amazing when I do a training session, how many people in the room, raise your hand, have goals? Or, okay, with that question, most people say, yeah, I have goals. How many have written them down? Less than 10%. That always amazes me. And then you say the statistics, well, the top 6% of the people in the world have written down their goals. Income producers, right. Successful people have written down, and then you go from there. And it's no coincidence. It's a correlation. I did a little bit of research on this when, people buying self-help stuff, all these sales training courses and everything that's out there. Did you know that actually 94% actually don't finish the course? And the 6% that do are among those 6% that have written down their goals. So it's not a coincidence. Everyone gets excited to start things, but it's pretty rare when someone finishes it. So yeah, I mean, having a plan and writing down, I came up with an action. I call it a weekly action sheet. Like I used to do everything by the day, and you have your to-do list by the day. Mm-hmm. But I have an action sheet that I write on every Monday morning. I spend an hour every Monday morning before I start my week. And I rewrite my yearly goals once a week. And then I rewrite my quarterly goals and I rewrite my monthly goals. Therefore, it's not written down once. I'm rewriting them once a week. So I see them and they reburn themselves in my brain. If I could impart any wisdom on anyone is try to do that as a habit. Rewrite your goals once a week, not only your weekly, but monthly, quarterly, and yearly.
What great advice, Alan. Thanks.
Yeah, and by the way, this might be counterintuitive to the younger listeners and viewers, but it is there is something psychological that's been psychologically proven that if you physically, that's it, you take a good old-fashioned pen and paper, and you write it down, you are far more likely to actually execute on it than if you just type it into your phone or something like that. So yeah, we may be old fogies, but it's something that we can offer you guys is like, try writing it down, try discovering what a pen looks like, a piece of paper, and you might actually find it's an amazing piece of technology. And Mark, I mean, obviously with your time with Miller Heiman and the work that you do today, it's no accident, I guarantee you, when you did Miller Heiman implementations, it's the same with Huthwaite Spin Selling, doing call planning. One of the few leading indicators of success is when people did call plans or filled out the blue sheets or whatever, correct?
Yeah, and actually CSO Insights, who's affiliated with the Miller Heiman Group, came up with the 12 behaviors of world-class sales organizations this year. And absent from that list of 12 was a great group decision dynamic selling methodology. But in that list of 12 was pre-call planning. Man, and they sell methodology. You would think that the research would say something about methodology, but it doesn't. It says something about they said it's about pre-call planning is more important than having an overall strategy for that group decision dynamic. Crazy, isn't it?
Yeah, but it does show you, because again, like I said, when I was running Huthwaite and we did implementations of spin selling or other things, is the best leading indicator of success was when people did call planning, and not just the salespeople, but when the managers reviewed call plans in advance and after calls as well. I mean, just those two simple things is like making sure that people did their call plans, and then after a call, reviewing the call plan to see how it went according to what the planning was. Those very simple. If people did one thing this year, reintroduce planning and then review the planning, and I think you would see immediately you would see an upswing in your success rates.
Now, John, I'm going to cut in. Sorry, Alan, but
No, it's fine.
when we would have a client that was a Miller Hyman client that was just really starting to get the methodology and was starting to do well and was starting to show ROI, you knew it was going to happen when sales manager would say to their salespeople, before we go into that meeting, I want to review that call plan with you. And as soon as you heard a sales manager say, before you go in on that sales call, let's look at your plan, you knew that they had turned the corner and they were going to really start getting traction on sales performance improvement.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's so critical and a great takeaway. Alan, is there anything else, any other fundamental, maybe forgotten or overlooked skill, tactic that people should be revisiting in 2020?
Well, the one thing that pops in my mind when I get asked that question is there was a great book by Carmen Gallo talked about, the name of the book was called Talk Like TED, and he evaluated all these thousands of TED Talks and what made them successful and what made them didn't. And he actually referred back to the Greeks when they came up with the three, Socrates came up with the three methods of communication, and it was called eros, logos, and pathos. And what that basically means is stats and figures, authority, and emotion. And what most sales rep get stuck with is they spend over 60 to 70% of their time on facts and figures about what they're selling. Then they go into the authority piece. Well, the owner of the company has owned this for 25 years and we've won these awards. And it's shown, proven that over all of these studies, 5% or less reps spend time on the emotion piece. But the emotion piece is what sells your product. It's what makes a person move to buy or purchase your product, like Mark said at the very beginning. So stop spending all your time on the features of your product. If you sell a copy machine and you spend 45 minutes of that hour talking about, 100 copies a minute and color and back to back and stapling, rather than telling a story about how that copy machine, saved one of the employees' daughters, by copying flyers for her Girl Scout cookies. That is such a difference if you're up against 3 other companies selling copy machines, because everybody does the same thing. It's the emotion part that's going to make that company or that person purchase your product. So really look at what you're doing and get rid of a lot of those features and increase the emotion part of your presentation.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think that really ties very neatly with what Mark has been saying is about the outcomes, because at the end of the day, one of the traps that people often fall into is demonstrating features that are of no interest to the person they're selling to,
100%.
rather than really understanding what the outcome is. And at the end of the day, that outcome, has a lot of emotion attached to it. So if you can really focus on the business outcome that person, and also understand what different buyers, what their motivation and what their outcomes are, right? Because it's not always the same. If you're selling to a group of people who are involved in the decision, the motivations and the outcomes they're looking for are not always the same. Right, Mark?
I completely agree. And an interesting thing to build on all this is that telling somebody a story is good, but having a conversation with them to ask what picture just formed in your head, how much value was there? I have this, I'm a little oversensitive to the term value messages, because the word messages, if you look it up in a dictionary, 8 of 9 dictionaries say it's unidirectional message flow from the messagor to a recipient. And value only lives in the mind of your customer. And so if you've burped something at them and you hope that the value that you want them to, have sensed took place or built there, without having a dialogue, without asking them to place themselves in the situation of, having purchased this and implemented it, and what does success look like? And can you see yourself living with this thing and having your career and your life flourish? When you have that conversation, then you've no longer value messaged, you value dialogued, and you force the customer to tell themselves the story, to think beyond the sale, to place themselves into that success scenario. And that is a completely different realm than value messaging or telling a great story. Getting the customer to see themselves being successful is a completely different thing.
And off of that, Mark, actually asking the customer ask them the question, how do you define value? What do you feel is what is value to you? They'll tell you. They'll say, this is what I think means. This is what I think value means. That's all the information you need. They're now telling you how to sell them. Again, I don't care, but they're telling you what's important to them.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, well, we're coming towards the end. I'm just looking at a couple of questions. So here's the one that keeps cropping up almost every time we have anything to do with sales, and that is the AI question. And it's, how much is AI going to impact how people sell going forward? That's obviously a very broad question, but let me get your thoughts on the role of AI going forward. Maybe Alan first.
It really depends on what you're selling. For example, I cut my teeth in the window world, in-home selling windows and doors. And when AI was introduced, it obviously helps customers realize what you're trying to sell them. You can just say, here's a window with this grid pattern and things. But now if they can see it on their house, it's a huge advantage, but it's still not everything, because they still have to feel comfortable with you and the company. And just showing them pictures of what it will look like would be great. But if they think you're a jerk, or they think you're not listening to them, doesn't matter. So yeah, AI is going to help in every area, but you still have to use it in a proper way. You still can't forget the human aspect of the one-on-one discussion.
No, absolutely. And by the way, just an interesting aside, because you mentioned Windows, because sometimes when we're talking about selling, people are always thinking, oh, the best selling experience are these really high end and complex and all of that kind of stuff. But I have to say, I did in one house replace all the windows in one house one time, and the company that we hired to do it in the end, the experience of working with them from the moment we engaged with them to long after the windows were installed was just so exceptional. They weren't the cheapest either. So there you go. We paid extra because the experience was so good working with these people every step of the way. So customer experience is critical. So Mark, your thoughts on AI?
AI means so many things. It means almost nothing, but at the basic level, there's machine learning, and AI is going to creep into sales in little puddles and pools that get bigger. And it's going to be, people are going to try to put AI into the middle of a customer interface, and that's not going to work for a very long time. But if we can use machine learning and AI to replace, to take drudgery off and take administrivia off of the hands of the salesperson so that they can spend more time with the customer being effective, that kind of AI, I think, has value. If you're trying to replace administrivia, but if you're trying to get AI to do something with a customer, to get between you and the customer, that's many, many, many years off before AI is going to be able to do that. So don't lump all machine learning and AI into one lump, and don't just blanket say AI is going to help me without being strategic and figuring out what A is and is not capable of doing for you today.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, I think it has a role to play, but it's a supportive role. It's not a replacive role. And to be honest, if it is replacing you, then you need to ask yourself what you're doing. Why can't you add more value to the equation? All right. Well, listen, this has been great. Thank you both very much for joining me today. Before we go, I just want you both again to let people know how they can find out more about you. All your information will be in the blurb below. But just before we go, Mark.
I am at Boundy Consulting. That's BOUNDY, almost like the paper towels, except with the deal. BoundyConsulting.com. The contact page, or you can email me at Mark with a K at BoundyConsulting.com.
Yeah, but stronger and more effective than even the Bounty.
That's right.
towels. And Alan.
Yeah, it's pretty simple. My website, Al Langer. So it's ALLANGER. So allanger.com. And you can get, again, contact page. You can get my book on the website. It'll send you to Amazon, or email alan@allanger.com.
Fantastic. All right, my name is John Golden from Sales Pop, online sales magazine and Pipeliner CRM. Thank you to everyone who joined us today. Thank you for the questions. And thank you in advance to all of those who will watch this later. I know there is a lot of great information and nuggets in here that I really, really recommend that you take notice of and implement, and you'll have a far better year. And we'll see you for another panel discussion really soon. But again, thanks to Mark and Alan, and you guys have a great 2020, everybody. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, John.
John, thank you.